Coming up on The World Today. Britain's economy shrank by a record 20.4% in April from March amid the COVID-19 lockdown. Seattle's mayor says it's unconstitutional and illegal for U.S. President Donald Trump to send military forces to clear protesters. Plus, Nigeria celebrates 21 years of uninterrupted democratic rule on Democracy Day. Thanks for joining us on the program. I'm Akaite Afia. A blast in Kabul mosque during Friday prayers has killed at least 4 people and wounded many more. Afghanistan's Interior Ministry announced that explosives placed inside the Shir Shah Ishuri Mosque exploded during Friday prayers. No group immediately claimed responsibility for the attack. The United States is attempting to broker peace talks between the Afghan government and the insurgent Taliban to end 18 years of war. The Islamic State group also has a presence in the country and has carried out large-scale attacks in Kabul in recent months. Over 1,000 Filipinos gathered in the University of the Philippines on Independence Day to prevent an anti-terrorism bill that was recently approved by the country's Congress. Despite sporadic rainfall, protesters held placards and chanted slogans such as "Junk Terror Bill" and "Activists, Not Terrorists." The bill has drawn concern from lawyers and human rights activists who fear it could be used to suppress free speech and harass those who challenge President Rodrigo Duterte. The anti-terrorism bill was approved by the Philippine Congress on June 3rd and currently awaits the president's signature before being enacted. Britain and the European Union still have plenty of work ahead before striking a trade deal, and the window of opportunity is closing for London before its Brexit transition period ends, according to the European Commission Vice President Marko Sefcovic. Britain left the EU in January, and since then their relationship has been governed by a transition agreement that keeps previous rules in place while they negotiate new terms. Sefcovic has said that British Cabinet Office Minister Michael Gove told him that London had no intention of extending the transition period beyond the end of the year, a prospect some fear may lead to a no-deal hard exit that could further the economic damage caused by the coronavirus pandemic. London and Brussels remain far apart on the issues of fair competition guarantees and the governance of their new relationship, as well as fishing rights. In talks last week, negotiators made very little progress towards a free trade pact, but they did agree to intensify negotiations.
With some 6 months to go before the end of the transition period, we still have lots of work to do. And this is true for all work streams, but in particular with regard to the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland. The window of opportunity to put in place the operational measures needed to ensure that the protocol can function as intended on the 1st January 2021 is rapidly closing. Michael Gove confirmed to me that the UK will not consider an extension of the transition period. From our side, I have taken note of the position of the UK on this issue and have stated, as President von der Leyen has already done, that the EU remains open to such an extension. We believe that it is perfectly possible to succeed on the basis of the existing mandate given to us by the Council. So I hope that the Monday's meeting between the President von der Leyen and the Prime Minister Johnson will lead to a fresh momentum on the UK side.
In France, policemen rallied against a ban on chokehold restraint techniques imposed by the government in response to public anger over the death of George Floyd and alleged police brutality in France. The French Interior Minister, Christophe Castaner, said earlier this week that the chokehold arrest would no longer be taught in police schools and that applying pressure on a person's neck as he or she is maintained on the ground during arrest would be banned. But French police did not welcome the decision, with unions telling the minister the chokehold saved lives and was a technique that officers needed at their disposal until a suitable alternative was found. Police unions marched in Paris on Friday to protest the ban, along with the increasing stigma that authorities are racist and violent. Amidst the racial protests sweeping the globe, statues of former kings of Belgium were targeted by activists. A statue of King Baudouin, Belgium's second longest reigning monarch after Leopold II, was found smeared in bright red paint in a park in front of Brussels Cathedral of St. Michael and St. Gudula. The word reparation was also painted on the back. During the same night, a statue of Belgium's King Leopold II was sovereign of the Congo Free State for much of his reign from 1865 to 1908, was removed from its pedestal by a group of activists. Statues of the colonial-era monarch, whose troops killed and maimed millions of people in Congo, have become a focus of anger and debate in Belgium and worldwide protests. In the United States, the mayor of Seattle said it would be unconstitutional and illegal for U.S. President Donald Trump to send military forces into the city to clear protesters occupying a neighborhood as he suggested. Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best said the neighborhood could not remain occupied, but neither she or Mayor Jenny Durkin said how or when authorities would remove the roughly 500 demonstrators who have established a makeshift encampment behind barricades in the Capitol Hill district. Protesters used the police barricades to section off the area, calling it the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone.
We are a passionate city. We demand justice. We are at the forefront of change. And I will not allow anyone to distract our city from the work that has to be done and will be done. Demanding we do better as a society and providing true equity for communities of color is not terrorism. It is patriotism. The right to challenge authority and government is fundamental to who we are as Americans. One of the things this president will never understand is that listening to community is not a weakness. It is a strength. A real leader would see nationwide protests, the grief in so many communities of color, particularly our Black communities, and the call to be an anti-racist society is an opportunity for America, an opportunity to build a better nation.
Well, let's talk to our correspondent in Washington, Maria Bird. Maria, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. The U.S. President Donald Trump has condemned protesters who have taken over a district of Seattle and threatened to intervene with military force, but the city's mayor has said that that would be illegal. Where does this leave the situation in Seattle?
This leaves the situation in Seattle with putting the police chief and the mayor in a position where they're going to have to make some very hard decisions. Obviously, as they said, they will not allow President Trump to come in and bring military force, but they're going to have to start paying attention to this encampment that has been built. But again, they're going to probably going through a lot of their policies and many of their legislation around kind of demonstrations, and they're going to probably enforce some areas that will allow for them to keep, obviously, a coherent environment for the people of Seattle. But furthermore, they will also try to respect the right of the demonstrators, which I think they've been very clear in stating throughout these past couple of days that they are going to respect those demonstrators.
Well, there is yet to be a proposed solution to clearing the activists occupied this autonomous zone. So does this mean that the activists will not be forced to move? And what rights do they have to occupy that space?
Again, the demonstrators do have a right to be in that space. The only space they would not have the right to be in is space that is government owned, and that has been definitely statutes relative to not being able to protest on that property. But most likely the area, and I'm sure that the mayor and the police chief are going to be looking exactly at those statutes of limitation, but those areas most likely are not areas that are government areas. that are owned by the government that do not allow protests. And so the likelihood of them being able to continue their protests, they will most likely be looking at ways to be able to come together with the protesters to find ways to say, okay, we're going to hear your needs. How can we address your needs so that we can move to another form, whether it's protest or moving them from the encampment? But again, this is, as we can see across the globe, people are not backing down, and they are saying we are going to have our voices heard. And so exactly what's happening now is what those protesters and those demonstrators wanted to happen. They wanted to create a conversation and force change to happen.
And with the president and the mayor each holding opposing views on the situation, it seems that they've reached a stalemate. So how do they move forward in a situation like this? And does the mayor have the power to refuse the military intervention?
Well, just like we saw in Washington, when the mayor of Washington came out very strongly against President Trump when the tear gas was spread and the military were brought in. And you can see the military then began to remove those National Guards from the streets in Washington. And she was very vocal on that. So we'll probably see a very similar situation. We might not actually see the military making it to Seattle, but again, you will see the mayor coming out very strong, and potentially other federal officials, the military might begin to support her, which will then put the White House in a position where they'll either continue to push or they will begin to listen to those federal officers that actually report into the White House.
Well, thank you so much again, Maria, for joining us today.
Thank you.
As we reach the 2-year anniversary of the Leaders First Summit, the situation between North Korea and the United States worsens. North Korea says it sees little use maintaining a personal relationship between leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump if Washington sticks to hostile policies. Foreign Minister Ri Song-kwon said in a statement carried by the state news agency KCNA that U.S. policies prove Washington remains a long-term threat to the North Korean state and its people, and Pyongyang will develop a more reliable military force to counter that threat. Ri added, in retrospect, the Trump administration appears to have only been focusing on scoring political points while seeking to isolate and suffocate North Korea, and threatening it with preemptive nuclear strikes and regime change. Trump and Kim exchanged insults and threats during 2017 as North Korea made large advances in its nuclear and missile program. Relations improved significantly around the Singapore summit in June 2018, the first time a sitting American president met with a North Korean leader. China has lambasted a report by Britain criticizing Beijing's plans for national security legislation, accusing it of interfering in Hong Kong affairs and noting Britain has no jurisdiction in the territory. The British government said the proposed security law was a clear violation of China's international obligations and a breach of the one country, two systems formula that has governed the former British colony since its handover to Chinese rule in 1997. Still on China, Hua Chunying, spokeswoman for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, says China will resolutely push forward the national security legislation for Hong Kong no matter how strong external interference is. Hua made the remarks in response to a report titled Six Monthly Report on Hong Kong, July to December 2019, by the UK government. China urges the British side to stop interfering in the Hong Kong affairs. Still ahead on The World Today. Excitement blooms as a drive-in movie theater in Ukraine opens just in time for the weekend. Stay with us. It's Democracy Day in Nigeria, a day set aside by the federal government to honor the late businessman and politician Moshood Abiola, believed to have won the 1993 presidential election. June 12th was first marked as Democracy Day in 2019 after President Buhari on June 6, 2018, announced that the Democracy Day would also hold on June 12th of every year, also observed as a public holiday. In a national broadcast to mark the day, President Buhari said the country has enjoyed 21 years of uninterrupted democratic rule as a result of the sacrifice made by the nation's founding fathers.
It's the second Democracy Day to be celebrated on June 12, marking 21 years of uninterrupted civil rule in the country.
Fellow Nigerians.
And as a routine, President Muhammadu Buhari delivers his address to the nation, paying tribute to the founding fathers of the country and other pro-democracy activists.
This day provides us an opportunity to reflect on our journey as a nation, our achievements and struggles. It is a day to honor our founding fathers who toiled to establish our republic and every Nigerian who has worked tirelessly to sustain it. Sustaining our democracy thus far has been a collective struggle, and I congratulate all Nigerians and particularly leaders of our democratic institutions for their resilience and determination. Nigeria would always be governed by the rule of law, and I will do my utmost to uphold the Constitution and protect the lives and property of all Nigerians.
Nigeria's economy has faced challenges in recent time, made worse by the outbreak of a COVID-19 pandemic. Notwithstanding, President Buhari reels out the achievements his administration has made so far in the area of economy.
On the economic front, our objectives have remained to stabilize the macroeconomy, achieve agricultural and food security, ensure energy sufficiency in power and petroleum products, develop infrastructure, fight corruption, and improve governance. We have witnessed 11 quarters of consecutive GDP growth since exiting recession. The GDP grew from 1.91% in 2018 to 2.27% in 2019, but declined to 1.87% in the first quarter of 2020 as a result of the decline in global economic activities due to COVID-19 pandemic.
Security is not left out in the president's speech as he restates his government's resolve to secure Nigerians as well as the nation's assets through effective implementation of community policing strategy.
Ending insurgency, banditry, and other forms of criminality across the nation is being accorded appropriate priorities, and the men and women of the armed forces of Nigeria have considerably downgraded such threats across all geopolitical zones. All the local governments that were taken over by Boko Haram insurgents in Borno, Yobe, and Adamawa have long been recovered and are now occupied by indigenes of these areas who were hitherto forced to seek a living in areas far from their ancestral homes. I regret recent sporadic incidents with tragic loss of lives in Katsina and Borno states as a result of criminals taking advantage of COVID-19 restrictions.
And a matter that has grabbed the headlines recently, the issue of sexual violence was not left out of the president's speech.
I am particularly upset at recent incidents of rape, especially of very young girls. The police are pursuing these cases with a view to bringing perpetrators of these heinous crimes to swift justice.
President Buhari did not end his speech without calling for more cooperation from the media, promising to ensure that freedom of the press is guaranteed in the country.
The COVID-19 pandemic has severely affected the global economy, and Britain is no exception as its economy shrank by a record 20.4%. More details coming now.
As a result of the pandemic, Britain's economy shrank by a record 20.4% in April from March as the country spent the month in a tight lockdown. Official data showed what is likely to be the bottom of the crash before a long and slow recovery. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development said on Wednesday, June the 10th, that Britain was on course for the worst downturn among the countries it covers, with the economy forecast to contract 11.5% this year. In Asia, the health minister in South Korea announced it will end its prevention and sanitation guidelines against the coronavirus until its daily new infections drop to single digits. It warned that failing to reach that goal will result in a return to tough social distancing measures. The announcement came as such cases persist in the mid-double digits following a series of new clusters in the area around Seoul, the capital, with 56 new cases on Thursday, June the 11th, taking the national tally to 12,003 and 277 deaths. Over in Libya, a sudden surge of coronavirus cases in the southern city has alarmed Libyans and caused a row over the repatriation of nationals stuck abroad, just as a new bout of warfare has forced thousands into crowded quarters. The National Center for Disease Control last week announced more than 90 new cases in the southern city of Sheba, after weeks with only a few dozen confirmed cases across the whole country. Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj formed the committee on May the 28th to investigate the spread of the coronavirus among the people returning from abroad. The number of global cases of COVID-19 surged over 7.2 million, with over 2.02 million of those cases coming from the United States. Despite the rise in cases, restaurants in the Northern California city of San Francisco prepare to resume outdoor dining. Some of the rules the city has put in place include limiting tables to 6 customers, except for members of the same household, face covering requirements for customers until they are seated and anytime they leave the table, and limited access to entering the restaurant. The island nation of Cuba is looking forward to reopening its borders, but the government announced on Wednesday, June the 10th, it will do so in phases. Prime Minister Manuel Marrero Cruz said reopening will be limited at first to the beach resorts at the Keys of the Caribbean's largest island. Visitors will not be able to visit Havana, the center of Cuba's outbreak. At first, beaches will also reopen, with local authorities ensuring social distancing, but summer carnivals will not take place this year.
Russians got a little taste of open air at the cinema under twilight skies when a Moscow drive-in movie theater reopened for business after the city's coronavirus lockdown ended. On the bill was My Spy, a U.S. action comedy, with regular cinemas still closed 3 days after the 2-month lockdown was lifted. Scores of moviegoers parked up to watch. According to recommendations by the country's consumer health watchdog, theater audience members will have to remain at least 1.5 meters apart, and employees will have to disinfect cinemas between screenings. Thank you for joining us for The World Today. I'm Akaite Afia. Have a great weekend.